All right, so here we are, day 12 of Men in Recovery series for National Recovery Month 2016. And I am really pleased to have my good friend Paul Hamblin here joining me. And Paul, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I start every conversation the same with the question, what's the greatest gift that recovery has given you toward being the man you always knew you could be?
And I sort of have to answer this in I have a two-part answer.
Absolutely.
The first part is I didn't get sober until I was in my late 30s. And I had never really been exposed to any 12-step program. I had never really considered myself an alcoholic or a drug addict, despite endless failed relationships, multiple DUIs, 17 jobs in 18 years, all of those things that most normal people would go, okay, well, I've really got a problem. It wasn't until I actually got into treatment and started reviewing my life that I realized that anything that was bad that happened to me was due to my drinking and drugging. I'd seen my peers start families, have successful relationships, have successful careers, and my thinking was, I'm just a horrible person. I'm an awful person. I'm a screw up. And the revelation that I had a disease, that I was an alcoholic and a drug addict, freed me and allowed me to understand that if I put down the drugs and the alcohol, I could be a successful person. And I wasn't a bad person trying to get good. I was a sick person trying to get well. And for me, for this alcoholic, that made all the difference. So fast forward, as I think many of us in recovery, as we get more and more time, it becomes less about staying sober and more about staying happy and staying connected. And so the secondary gift of recovery to me was, now that I've asked for help and now that I've decided that I need to be humble and I need to be open to listening to people like you, frankly, and to others who are saying, okay, we put the plug in the jug, but is that really the only thing that we can get out of this program? And absolutely, that's absolutely not the case. It's how can we become better people, better friends, better husbands, better bosses, and how can we remain authentic? And so that's, to me, the secondary gift that I think most people get after they understand that it's not just about putting down the drugs or the alcohol.
And so are you saying the authenticity is really one of the gifts?
Oh, in a huge way, because what we both do for a living, I think helps us understand things, and especially as men, the whole idea of trauma and the whole idea of how that affects us. I think as men, we have a real hard time understanding how trauma has affected us. Because if it isn't overt, if it isn't something that's catastrophic, then how could it be trauma? To me, our definition of where I work is trauma is anything less than nurturing. So if you grew up in a family that was anything less than nurturing, you've experienced trauma, and the lens that you look at life through is based on that. And I think people like you who give us permission to look at things like that, that talk about it in an open way, that this is, how it affects us and how men react to that, is something we need to look at, gives us all the opportunity to become better people. And, the interesting thing to me was you were talking, I think, a couple weeks weeks ago about anger, and I default to anger to this day, and I'm a work in progress. And the more I can look at that and say that my anger is really fear, helps me process it in a different way, and maybe the next time I'm in that situation, I won't react the same way. And that's, it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's the gift of having people in your life that can point out things to you that can make you a better person in the long run.
Well, that's there's a lot in that response that's really wonderful, right? So what kept coming up for me as you were talking is like, authenticity is hard. And I mean, it's become a word that we use so much, but in some ways, authenticity is hard. It asks a lot. There's a high degree of vulnerability. There's a high degree of risk. There's a high degree of emotional pain, I think, that can come with it. But I also think that once you have a degree of understanding that authenticity works, and that authenticity gives us the opportunity to have that happiness that you're talking about, but it also hurts not to be authentic. And so we find ourselves constantly navigating the pain of authenticity, which I think has real substance and real value, versus the pain of inauthenticity, which the only value that it may have is that it reminds us that we're being inauthentic.
Right. And I think that, especially for men, the idea, for me, I think we all want to have a level of intimacy. And to me, being intimate is two things. It's vulnerability and honesty, two things that I wasn't very good at when I was out there drinking and drugging, and actually wasn't very good at in early recovery. Because one, that's not how men react to things. And two, I hadn't changed my defaults. My default was angry. My default was running away. My default was ignoring things, situations and people and things that were unpleasant to me. And I think the more dialogue we have around that and make it acceptable for not only men, but all of us to explain to people that the only way to be truly intimate is to be vulnerable. And as scary as that is, the rewards are far greater than any risk that you're going to be taking.
Absolutely. I mean, I identify with the default being anger. That's why I talk about it so much, because I know, it's like I refer to it as the illusion of anger. And of course, you have to be careful about that, because those who experience it doesn't feel like an illusion at all. But it's really about cultivating that awareness that, like you said, now on a daily basis, I can really just stop and I can say, what's really going on here? And this is not the man I want to be. I don't want to come across this way. And it is related to trauma. It's related to those neural pathways, those connections that have been ingrained in us. Your default's been anger for so long. It's not going to change. The brain is wired to get that response. We can change that. You of all people know that. And the power of looking at those connections is so critical. And we begin to do that. The healing solution for shame and trauma is the vulnerability, is the honesty, is the intimacy, right? I mean, like, there's no question that that's how we heal through it. And it is, you and I have talked a lot about this, but for men, for me at least, I don't know about other men, but I think for a lot of us, it's like a daily reminder. It's a daily reminder that we come by it honestly. This resistance that you're talking about, and this difficulty that we feel. So one, we can't beat ourselves up or shame ourselves for being who we were raised to be. And then at the same time, there's that daily reminder that says, but I'm responsible. I'm responsible for showing up as the man I want to be. And I can't just simply say, well, that's how men are, because I know that's not true. It's like, where do I have to risk in my relationship today? Where do
Yeah, and I agree. I think just like the revelation that I had in early recovery, that a huge part of my problems were because I drank and used drugs, and that didn't become a crutch for me. That became a solution that gave me the answer so I could move forward. Much the same as knowing that what my defaults are and knowing how I react to things isn't a crutch to say, well, that's how I am and that's, how I'm going to stay. But if I remain teachable and honest to myself and to others, I can move beyond that. But I'm not going to do it perfectly. And I think, what's interesting about this conversation is that, this is National Recovery Month. People have been posting on Facebook and other forums their recovery dates, and we're not hiding our light under a bushel, as I say, because people need to know out there that people can recover and lead happy and healthy and wonderful lives. But it also brings on the fact that we need to have dialogues like this. We need to have more conversations about the next step, because getting sober for sober's sake is not enough for any of us. Mm-hmm. That's just the beginning of the journey, in my opinion. And so I think these are great conversations that we need to continue to have. And if there's somebody out there that's feeling the same way, and this opens a door a little bit for them, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's so important what you're saying. I mean, we want to celebrate recovery. We want to celebrate early recovery because it is such a deliverance of pain and suffering. A lot of the time, it's the deliverance of our pain and suffering, not necessarily everybody else's, whose experience has been in the wake of our destruction. But I'm also, with what you're saying, I'm reminded of that classic line, what happens when you sober up a horse thief?
Still a horse thief.
A sober horse thief. And that's that's what I hear you saying. And I think for men in particular, some of these difficult behaviors and interactions, they run so deep and have become so part of who we think we are, that it really does take extra work. I mean, it really does take extra consciousness. And it is imperative for those of us who have been doing this journey longer to put the message out that there's so much more. There's so much more than this just being about not using, And so I really appreciate you saying that. I always want my guests to have the last word. So I just want to say that I really value you. I value all the work you're doing. You're making an incredible difference in the lives of people who are sober, in recovery, and looking for that deeper emotional recovery in connection to self and others. It's a huge gift that you're giving. And so I just want to thank you for that. And thank you for being a part of this project.
Thanks, Dan. And thank you for the opportunity. I just want to say that I've been in bed for the last 2 days, pretty miserably sick. But friends get out of bed and clean up a little bit to help other friends. And this helped me. And it's exciting that we're having these discussions. I'm encouraged that this dialogue is happening, and you have been a big part of this and continue to be a big part of this. And I'm proud to call you my friend. And I'm really happy that I had the opportunity to speak to you today.
Well, thanks so much. Happy Recovery Month.
Thanks, Dan.